Welcome to day 2 of the Davos Daily Show. Coming up, we kick things off with the FT editorial view, where Polita Clark and I will unpack the latest developments and challenges in climate and energy policies. Then, in our FT Leaders interview, Polita has spoken to Jakob Stausholm, CEO of Rio Tinto, about the role of industry leaders in achieving net zero goals. Then we'll delve into accelerating the energy transition with an expert panel discussing technology, policy and financial mechanisms. Lastly, Matthew Vincent chats to Inga Anderson, Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Programme. It's a critical conversation for policymakers, businesses and all of us. Stay with us. This is the Davos Daily Show, brought to you by FT Live. Hello. It's about a few degrees colder here in Davos than it was when we started the week, and there's snow forecast. But there's certain sense that the energy transition and the move to a low-carbon economy and all policies relating to climate change are in suspense while we hear what's happening in Washington. The FT this morning is leading its homepage with news that some $300 billion, we estimate, of green infrastructure projects are in jeopardy following Donald Trump's decision to issue an executive order to stop them going ahead. So that is overshadowing a lot of the discussions here, which traditionally are often dominated by discussion of climate change and sustainability. And I'm joined by our Associate Editor and colleague Polita Clark, our climate expert, to talk to me a little bit about what the implications are, Polita, of a Trump presidency for this all-important global agenda of climate change policy.
Yes, well, as you say, Davos has traditionally been the home of a lot of the people proselytizing the ideas about a new green economy and the need for climate action and the need to completely overhaul the global energy system to ensure that the world doesn't burn and the planet is kept safe. And I think what's interesting just over the last couple of days is that even though President Trump telegraphed all of the moves pretty much that he has made very swiftly, I might add, on day one really a lot of these moves came, rescinding, as you say, these disbursements under the Inflation Reduction Act, moving to make electric cars less affordable, doing things to make fossil fuels, be it LNG, gas, oil, a lot more affordable, and indeed threatening or being expected to make it clear to Europe if they don't buy a lot more of American oil and gas, then tariffs could be in view. And I think what's interesting is even though all this had been widely spoken about on the campaign trail, even though we saw what happened in the first term of Mr. Trump's presidency, it's still a sort of an element of shock, and people are still trying to adjust to seeing it actually kind of practically happening in real life, is how I would describe things at the moment. So people are kind of saying, well, you know, obviously if European companies are saying we're still in this, we're not going to be moving away from this, we still understand the climate imperative, that's not going to change. And yet, when you press people a little bit more and say, well, how is it not going to change if you've got the world's largest economy making these moves and overturning the previous Biden administration's agenda, how is it not going to change? People will say, well, yes, I mean, there are going to be pressures. I mean, on background, people are saying, you know, it is a different world and we are going to have to adapt.
And this is coming at a time when it's already the case that the energy transition is slowing and needs to speed up, if anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going nearly as fast as it needs to, and that's the big concern that a lot of people have. I mean, this morning I was chairing a panel about the electrification of Europe, which is incredibly important. It's really important to, and the Ukraine war has shown why it's important to electrify as much as possible with green electricity and cut dependence on oil and gas from elsewhere, and as well cut carbon emissions. And, you know, people are saying, well, that the climate imperative is still there. Nothing is actually going to change. But now I think the need to make it clear that it's about growth and resilience is something that you're hearing a lot of. You know, people are saying, well, we may not be changing our policies, but we might not be talking about saving the planet. We might be talking more about resilience and ensuring that the world can adapt to warmer temperatures. So
Yes.
I think, as one woman said, we're really talking about a situation where we have to use a new dictionary. We're not going to be using the same words we might have before, but it doesn't necessarily mean that what we're doing on the ground is going to change as much as might be imagined.
Okay, well, that perhaps gives a moment for optimism. I heard exactly the same thing from the CEO of a publicly held transportation company in a red state in the United States, who they don't boast about what they're doing. They're talking not at all about the need to save the planet, but resilience was exactly the word that he's using in the context of talking to his owners and political shareholders and other stakeholders who are sceptical about climate change. Resiliency is the word. But does that suggest that what's happening in America is purely rhetorical?
Absolutely not, and particularly for America, because this is going to have the biggest impact, without doubt, in the United States. And our front page story today on the home page is absolutely emblematic of that. Investors have told our colleagues that they think that more than $300 billion worth of infrastructure and energy projects are now in jeopardy, at risk, may very well not be built. And that's a lot of money, and that's a lot of infrastructure that, as you say, was going to be delivering, or was aimed at delivering, a greener economy in the US as fast as possible, and it's just not going to happen now. So, during the election, we kept hearing, it became in conventional wisdom that Mr. Trump wasn't going to be able to roll back a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act because the money was out there. It was in Republican states, and so they were going to have to. He was going to have to wrest this money away from Republicans who quite liked seeing this money come to their constituents. I think, the reality is that this is going to have an impact on a lot of projects that would have gone ahead. They're big energy projects, big battery storage projects, other big projects that are really going to be affected. And the other reason that clearly we have to take this seriously is the reaction we've seen in the markets to what Mr. Trump's done so far. We saw even Tesla shares going down,
right.
Wind turbine company shares going down. So, the market takes this seriously because it has to, because it's not rhetoric, it is real, particularly in the US.
Right. Do you think there's any chance, you mentioned Tesla there, that Elon Musk, who obviously has the ear of the president for now, might just have a word and say, look, perhaps you're overdoing it a bit on the anti-green initiatives?
If I understood what was going on in Elon Musk's mind,
You'd be a richer
I would tell
person
you,
than
and everybody watching. But I think you might be challenging something there. But no, I don't. Who knows? I mean, this was always going to be. It was something that was again discussed during the campaign. And I think what Elon Musk was saying then was very little, but what other people were pointing out was that Tesla is actually so far ahead of a lot of the conventional automakers that these measures will hit them harder than it will hit Tesla.
Right.
He's the world's richest man. The share price drop is going to affect him marginally, but not hugely.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Now, to what degree does this represent, I guess it's a bit much to call it an opportunity for Europe, but clearly there might be money that is flowing in a different direction. We're going to get a divergence, aren't we, of policies here between the European Union and the UK, for that matter, and the US, which may not be enough for the planet, but might represent a kind of bit of optimism for those of us who think those policies are important.
Yes, I think that is possible. I think the bigger and more important divergence is going to be between the United States and China.
Right.
And in fact, the last time Mr. Trump was in office was when China leapt ahead on a lot of green energy technologies, renewables, electric cars, batteries, and we're seeing the results of that today, where China is far and away the most enormous juggernaut of green energy that there is on the planet. So I think we're going to see that continuing. And what's going to be interesting to watch, I think, and there's been a lot of discussion here, is what Mr. Trump is going to do on things like critical minerals, the minerals that underpin the energy transition because they're used in batteries and wind turbines. And there's a lot of discussion about, is he going to try to maintain or keep up the program that President Biden had implemented, where he was trying to ensure that these minerals could not just be processed, almost 90% of them in China, as is currently the case, and try to make sure that the US, Europe and other countries would come to the fore and new mines might be opened. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Right. Now, obviously, the World Economic Forum has over many years set its stall by pursuing this progressive and sustainability agenda. There's a lot on the formal programme still about that. There's even a lot of the pavilions down the main promenade that are advertising their sustainability credentials. As Gideon Rachman remarked yesterday at the beginning of Davos, does this leave the World Economic Forum a bit out on a limb, looking a little bit like an irrelevancy as the biggest economy in the world ploughs ahead with a drill baby drill agenda?
I don't know about that, because in many ways what's happening here is a reflection of what one sees repeatedly in survey after survey around the world, where consumers, voters, ordinary citizens are really concerned about climate change. And businesses here, yes, it's true that Davos has turned into a place where these ideas are expressed very boldly, and indeed, as you say, they still are here. There's an entire climate hub where you can go and listen to panel after panel after panel of people explaining why it's not going to make any difference what's happening in Europe, in the US. But to that extent, I think probably not. I'd be surprised if the entire agenda rolls back, and to that extent, I think Davos is still going to be reflecting something that's very real outside.
Right. So you're a newcomer to the World Economic Forum. What are you making so far of what you're hearing, not just on climate but on other things? Is it a confusion of voices, or do you detect important themes emerging from your discussions?
I think one of the most interesting things that I've discovered is in almost every session I've been in, eventually talk turns to AI, blockchain, perhaps crypto, particularly blockchain and particularly AI. And I think there's a real sense that with luck, AI is going to be able to save us from ourselves, and everybody wants to understand how that's going to happen. Also, there's a huge competitive pressure, obviously, for businesses to understand how best to use it. And so, as soon as AI is introduced into the conversation, I find everybody on the panel, in the audience, wants to talk about it, wants to understand more. So that, to me, I think is very interesting, because I have to say, in London sometimes, you don't always get the impression that there is that hunger to understand and use AI as much as there clearly is here in Davos.
Do you see any opportunities for AI to link into the sustainability agenda? People are talking about this as a way in which they can understand the highly complex world of everything from weather patterns to energy usage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are AI companies here saying that even though AI itself is going to be a tremendous drain on energy, and even though it's going to require the construction of a lot more energy infrastructure, there are companies here who are saying, look, we are going to be able to use AI to improve energy efficiency, so you won't actually need to build as many new nuclear reactors to train the AI agents and whatnot. However, it's interesting what they're saying is that at the moment, the world isn't set up to give us the data that we need to train the AI to do this work. And so I've heard that repeatedly, that there needs to be a lot more work done in the non-AI world. On the
inputs for the AI models.
Exactly.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes. So just to come back to Trump, we have to, everyone is. In the absence of that US global leadership, where do you see the global leadership for the energy transition? Which bloc is it coming from? Which people is it coming from? Which leadership? Where's the leadership here?
Right, so clearly I would say in the EU they've always been a leader here, especially compared to other places where particularly large fossil fuel exporters like the US and elsewhere. I don't think that's going to change at the government level. What I'm really intrigued to see is where is the business leadership going to come from? And so far I've spoken to one person who has full-throatedly said that it's going to be a complete mistake to turn your back on climate change policy, ESG, DEI, everything else. And that's Andrew Forrest, who's the founder of his own, he's Australia's richest man, has the Fortescue iron ore mine. And he basically said, look, all of these people who are wanting to jump onto the anti-ESG bandwagon and run full steam ahead, bugger the iceberg, excuse my French, but that's what he said, they are in for a shock, because the climate doesn't care about our politics, and it's getting worse, and that's the reality, and so that's going to be the driving momentum here.
Right, but of course he is the owner of his own company, so he has the freedom to say that, doesn't have to cover it up with this rhetoric about resiliency, not mention the planet, etc.
Yeah, he controls that company, and you're exactly right. It's very different for these chief executives of these large publicly held companies that have a lot of a diverse shareholder base and don't feel able to say the same thing at all.
And clearly what we saw from the inauguration was an array of tech entrepreneurs and CEOs surrounding Donald Trump. They clearly have the vehicles, the channels for communication that will be able to manage the message in ways that might ultimately turn out only to be sympathetic to the Trump point of view.
Yeah, it's interesting, and there's not many of them here in Davos, interestingly.
Right.
I think we've got the chief executive of Uber, which is not quite the same thing, but yeah, I mean, it's been very interesting to see that, I think.
Yes, yes. So stick with us for Police's interview with Jakob Stausholm of Rio Tinto, and keep with us for a number of panel discussions and further interviews about the all-important energy transition. Thank you, Polita, for joining us. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned. For over 130 years, the Financial Times has been recognized internationally for its authority, integrity, and accuracy. FT Live builds on this legacy by bringing you global events on business-critical issues. From the rapid rise of artificial intelligence to economic shocks and geopolitical risk, our events examine the disruptive forces facing decision makers in today's complex world.
You never know when the opportunity may come. Just be ready.
Football is for everybody.
The only way you're going to break through that noise is innovation, and the only way you innovate is by tapping into different talent pools.
The only way you kill an idea is with a better idea.
Hard questions.
Why? Why did you agree to this?
Intelligent answers.
In a crisis, you really have to focus on what you can control.
Crucial connections. Engage with leaders, acquire essential insights, gain an edge with FT Live.
Jakob, welcome to the Davos Daily Show.
Thank you.
So, early last week, when I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today, I thought we might kick off with some general discussion about the state of the global economy, what the mining industry is up to. But then all of a sudden, Rio Tinto was in the headlines itself with this news that you'd been talking to Glencore about a combination of part or all of the two companies. So what was the strategic rationale for that?
Yeah, look, the reality is, of course, we didn't go into any news, and it's entirely rumors, and we just cannot comment on rumors. It's impossible for a company to comment on all these sorts of rumors. If you go back over the last 12 months, there's almost not a single mining company where there hasn't been any rumors of either Rio was buying it or merging or whatever you like to say. Maybe not BHP, because Rio Tinto and BHP can, for competitive reasons, never merge. But so look, there has been so many rumors, and I simply cannot comment on them. What is clear, though, is that we have stepped up our business development and our growth over the last year, and you've seen we have made great progress on buying one of the world's best lithium companies, Arcadium Lithium. So it's not that we are standing still.
You're not standing still, and two very different companies, obviously, but the mining industry has seen a wave of deal making over the past couple of years for a range of reasons, but one part of them is because of a desire to expand in these metals that are going to be critical to the energy transition, particularly copper. And Rio and BHP have actually, you've got a joint venture with a really interesting big copper mine in the US, in Arizona, the Resolution mine, which has been held up for many, many years. Because of the usual, I guess, in some ways, complaints, and understandable in many ways, complaints about conservation concerns, Native American concerns have been raised as well. Now that President Trump is in office, though, do you think that there's a hope that the project may get off the ground?
I think the starting point is it in the best interest of the US to have this project happening? And Resolution can produce 25% of the copper needs of the United States of America. And right now, the US is importing a lot of copper. They have more growth in demand, and they don't have new mines coming on, so the import will only go up. So if they want to be less dependent on a critical mineral like copper, it would be a good thing. We have made a lot of progress, and we will never compromise when it comes to the needs of the First Nations people. Made a lot of progress there, and I myself have spent a lot of time there. I feel comfortable that we can progress the things. And you're right, under the previous Trump administration, we actually got the land swap, which is the next step in the process, and that has been held up by various reviews for quite a while. So maybe that could progress. But you're touching on something that's absolutely right, is we actually, inside the company, have a lot of opportunities to further grow our copper portfolio. We are blessed with a number of opportunities. You might have seen just a month ago, we made an important deal on the Winu copper deposit in Australia, and we have copper deposits a number of other places. And right now, what I'm most proud of is that the big Oyu Tolgoi mine is ramping up, and we expect it to produce much more copper this year than last year. So we are growing the portfolio.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just going back to Resolution, the Apache have taken their case to the Supreme Court, and I wonder, have you got any information about when that case might be heard?
Yeah, it's within days, but we have now been through quite a few court on this topic, and we have won every time. And I see no new information that should change that.
Right, right. But basically, you think that potentially with the change of administration, that there is now more hope than there was previously about approval being granted?
I guess we have always had the hope, but I do think that we have really good chances now to progress that project.
Yeah. So Rio is a top producer of a lot of the minerals that are really going to play a crucial role in the green energy transition. However, President Trump has also made it clear that he's not a fan of some aspects of that green energy transition. I wonder, do you think there's also a chance that his administration might slow it down a bit?
Well, that's a choice for the US. A number of other countries, China, for example, is progressing very, very fast on the green transition. But if you look at some of the things that we are working on, you can say climate is very important, and then there are some people who think climate is less important. But what we are trying to do is actually to create more energy and create cheaper energy via solar and wind, and then you have to find ways to firm it. And in some places, many places where we have hydropower as well. So at the end of the day, it's not just a question around climate change. It's also a matter of that the world needs more energy, and we are investing in those things. And by the way, the materials we are producing are needed for that. More batteries, lithium, copper, aluminium is crucial for the grid, etc.
That's absolutely right. Another very important aspect of the new administration is obviously what we're expecting to see in the way of new tariffs being imposed. Are you concerned that a raft of new tariffs are going to hit the commodities sector in a damaging way?
It could happen, and something happened in the previous Trump administration, and actually it has panned out quite well. I fundamentally believe that the US will do things that are in their interest, and they will not impose things that are not in their interest. So the current tariff regime that we have is actually not from the Biden administration, but from the Trump administration.
Right. So, but do you think, or indeed have you been making the case that there should be a kind of a carve out on tariffs for, say, aluminium, copper, other minerals, if it were to come to pass?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there would be, I hope there will be a chance for coming with arguments, but fundamentally we are not politicians. We are running a business, and you know, politicians are being elected by the people, and they now have to decide what to do, etc. And what I'm just saying is, in the past we have been able to deal with it. I feel quite optimistic about that we will find good solutions as well. And it's complicated because it's between all sorts of countries around. I mean, yes, Canada is important for us, but Argentina is also important for us. A number of African countries are important for us vis-a-vis the US. So, and you know, certain things might fall out in our favor and certain things might not. Time will tell.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if you walk down the street here in Davos, you'll see storefront after storefront has been taken over by AI companies. It's obviously a big AI forum this year. And artificial intelligence is going to create, we're told, a substantial new form of demand for critical minerals on top of the existing demand that everybody's expecting as a result of the green energy transition. From where you sit, I know that it's constantly said that nobody needs to worry about any of these metals ever running out long term, but short term, could we see some bottlenecks and therefore some price fluctuation for some of these metals that haven't been evident so far?
I mean, it's the history of mining, is that you can only provide the supply over a period of time, and demand might change a little bit faster, and therefore there will always, from time to time, be short of supply, which then gives a price hike, and then they'll get a correction, because the world is not missing. We have plenty of copper and aluminium and lithium, but it's really the question of which resources can be extracted cheap enough, and if the price suddenly goes out, then you can extract something else, etc. So I don't think people should be overly worried about whether these things can be provided. But you're absolutely right that the whole AI, digital in general, the data centers are extreme consumers of energy. And that requires more energy resources. Right now, the world has struggled to move away from around 80% of the world's energy needs comes from fossil fuels. And of course, what the energy transition is trying to do is to have a larger share of solar, wind, and hydro. And if that is happening, and it looks like it's happening, then there will be more needs for copper, lithium, and aluminium.
Yeah, and I guess that does get us back to what a lot of analysts do see as the strategic rationale for a lot more deal making. But do you think that's going to continue in the industry?
It's difficult to say. It is a fairly fragmented industry, but in certain areas like iron ore, to a certain extent copper, to a certain extent aluminium, you actually have some consolidation. We went quite big into lithium right now, because lithium was a kind of a new industry with a lot of small players who might find it difficult to take the long view when the prices goes up and down. And therefore, we thought there was an opportunity for consolidation, and I think that is what we are driving quite a lot at the moment.
Yeah, but lithium prices have been quite low recently.
Yeah, but that may be an advantage
right.
when you want to do the consolidation.
And supply is dominated by China. Are you confident that that's ever going to change?
I wouldn't say that. I think demand is dominated by China, because China is very successfully developing their battery industry and their EVs. But there's some production in China, but China really needs to import lithium from other places in Latin America particularly, but also Australia and Africa.
Just looking at some other headlines Rio Tinto has been making. You've been facing pressure from activist investors who say that shareholders would be much better off if the group gave up its primary London listing and unified its corporate structure in Australia. Do you think they have a point at all?
Another headline that has been created, not by Rio, but by somebody else about Rio. And quite frankly, if you get an activist who buys your stock, you got to be humble and you got to say, do they have a point? And we really, really analyzed this in detail. And the conclusion is the current setup is in the best interest of the shareholders. It really is. What you have here from the merger in 1995 is a dual-listed company where a certain percentage is owned by an Australian company, where you have the advantage, you have the shareholders have this advantage of franking credits that international investors cannot have. They can buy the international company, the PLC in the UK, and therefore it's the best of the two worlds for the two companies. And we can do anything. People saying you can't do M&A, well, I think we are proving that we can do M&A with the current structure. So it actually works for us. I know it's not the most fashionable, but I'm not here to follow the fashion. I'm here to do things in the best interest of the shareholders.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and just on that M&A point, I mean, you know, there was a lot, it wasn't just us, it was everybody was reporting about the Glencore talks. But are you saying that they were just all totally rumours, that there was no substance whatsoever to anything, no talks?
What I say is very clearly is that I don't comment on rumours.
Okay. Well, okay.
And you know why?
But
do you know why? Because if I one day says that rumour is not true, then the next time if I don't do the same thing, then you will say it's true. So therefore, I never comment on rumours.
Yeah. Just another issue that Rio Tinto has been involved in recently has, of course, you've been overseeing this incredibly sweeping effort to bring in cultural change at the company following the destruction of the ancient Aboriginal site in Australia in 2020 that saw the departure of your predecessor and the chairman. So you released a report recently that showed that you'd been making progress in some areas, but not so much in others. But you are determined to double down on these diversity programs and efforts to promote inclusion at the company. That's not what's happening at some companies in the US, where we've seen these really enormous companies basically walking away, winding back, reining in their diversity and inclusion efforts. What do you make of that?
I mean, first of all, we are a long-term company and we have the staying power. And if you want to change things like culture, you don't do it quickly. You just have to just carry on. And we are making true progress. If you take the latest Liz Broderick report, it's very clear when we ask our staff, the overwhelmingly majority is saying there's real progress being made. But we still have almost the same number of cases, and you know why? That's the more psychological safe environment you get, the more people are coming forward with things. It's tough, it's not easy, but it's necessary that we are able to talk about things that we simply didn't talk about before. And that is because I can't change the culture. We have to kind of collectively decide we are prepared to change the culture. When you can have the right dialogue, that's where you're changing the culture. I'm absolutely convinced. And this is not, it's very important. You say there's pushback and wokeism. This is not about being woke. This is about when you get that culture right, this company will perform better. When people are engaged and feel that they are in a good environment, they just perform better.
Right. So you would say it just makes business sense, and it doesn't make business sense to ignore diversity.
I totally agree. I've learned a lot through that process myself.
Jakob, thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
How do you unlock business growth? By bringing transparency, truth and trust to data at scale. BSV blockchain unlocks new possibilities, enhances decision-making and boosts profitability. The future of your business is limitless. Build better with BSV.
Welcome back to the warmth of the studio for our live panel with a panel of experts to talk about accelerating the energy transition, the theme of today's Davos Daily Show. I'm joined by Kim Hedegaard, CEO of the Power-to-X operations of Topsoe of Denmark, Ásgeir Óskarsson from the CEO of BSV Blockchain, and Vaishali Nigam Sinha, the co-founder of the Indian clean power company Renew. Welcome to all of you. Kim, I want to start with you. just tell us where you think the state of play is. What is the state of play in the energy transition at the moment?
And thank you very much, and thank you for the invite. I think you could take many different approaches to the state of play. I think if you want to be brutally honest, the state of play is that we have not come far enough compared to the ambitions that we had. The ambitions that I think all of us had on behalf of the planet, making sure that it is sustainable and that there is actually a planet for both our children and our grandchildren. You could also take the more positive spin on it and say that we have never been further developed. We have never been further developed on the expansion of renewable energy, on the discussions on what policies, what incentives do we need to put in place. The interaction between policymakers, off-takers, and solution providers like the company that I represent. But I think the underlining message here is that a lot has been done already, but much more needs to be done in the next 2, 5, and 10 years in order for us to catch up on the gap that we have created since we set ourselves off on a journey to reverse the climate challenges that we see. I think if you look at numbers, BNEF, I think they claim that we are somewhere between 10 and 20% on the pathway on the ambition to come to net zero.
Right.
So I think fair enough to say not far enough despite the amazing progress that has already been done.
Right, so come a long way, need to go further and faster if we're going to
Absolutely.
save the planet.
Absolutely.
Charlie, do you agree with that nuanced view about how far we are along with the energy transition?
No, I agree 100% with what you are saying. We are definitely lagging behind, and we're not meeting our 2030 target for sure, 1.5 degrees, and it's debatable where we're going to land. So that's not good news. But I also like to see how is this glass half full. And I would say, I think in India, we've made a lot of progress with respect to clean energy, our ambitions as a country, and our achievements as well. So we have an ambitious target of 500 gigawatts. And if I were to just break that down, what that means is over the last few years, let's say from 2000 to 2010, we had about 30 gigawatts on the ground. Since then, as we speak now, we have 200 gigawatts on the ground. We were generating about 15 gigawatts to 20 gigawatts on an average over the last 5 to 6 years, year on year. Going forward with our targets, we're going to be putting up 50 gigawatts on the ground. So I think enabling policy, committed leadership, we can talk a lot about committed leadership, committed to a clean and a green country, enabling policies, and then execution on the ground. So as we speak, we started about 12, 13 years ago, and we have about 11 gigawatts on the ground with a visible pipeline of another 5 gigawatts. So, I think I'm optimistic, and there are a number of products which I think we can introduce to ensure that we have cleaner and decarbonized sort of solutions for not only ourselves, but also for other companies. And, in addition to not having place for our children, if we don't have a planet, we won't have dollars to spend. So whoever is looking at the economics over the sort of sustainability must reassess that.
Yes, that's the ultimate equation, of course. Ásgeir, the technology that is part of the solution here, clearly that ought to help us accelerate this transition. What do you think is the role of technology in making these steps and accelerating, as both Kim and Vaishali have said?
Yeah, thanks for this. It's crucial. So I would agree with both of them, but I'm actually also more optimistic because we now have groundbreaking technology that is maturing, that is becoming more mainstream, and that is people are becoming more aware of it. So we look at artificial intelligence, you look at blockchain technology, which we represent, Internet of Things. And I think the beauty of it, when these three technologies would come together, you can really create not only innovative financial models or innovative business models for the companies that are running that, but you can actually make a massive difference on a local and global scale. And this is where I think the technology can come in really nicely. So I'm very positive and of the outlook of the next coming years, where we're getting more awareness of the beauty behind this technology and the potential it has.
Right, and can the advantages of the technology like AI and blockchain offset the dangers of energy usage with increased AI and blockchain and crypto employment?
It's a very good point, and it's a point that comes up regularly in discussions. So when you look at energy usage, what we should look at is also what do you get for it, right? What is the output that you get from the energy usage? So from an AI perspective, I believe that it's relatively new, it's gone really fast, right? So I think that now the discussions are coming with AI around energy consumption. Blockchain has been around a bit longer, so you've seen that discussion already happening. So we're very much focused on sustainability, and as BSV Blockchain, we're very much focused on scalability and providing as much output as possible with as little energy usage as possible. So it's definitely a topic to be addressed, and it's either initiative coming from the businesses themselves or the foundations that represent these technologies, and partially also regulatory. So in the European Union, there's a very strict regulatory principles regarding blockchain. You need to provide your objective sustainability data. That's going to roll out in the next month. And that will give a lot of transparency and more trust and awareness about the situation. So yes, there is energy usage, as there is with everything we do in life, but I think we should also look at what the output is. I think that's really important.
Yes, Vaishali.
I'd like to come in there. So we work a lot. We work with the likes of Microsoft, etc., to help them with their data centers and to use clean energy. So that's a very easy way to kind of ensure that we are offsetting the emissions with the use of clean and green energy. So so it's a business opportunity for us, but I guess it's a part of your kind of decarbonization plans and solutions as you set your targets for Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. I guess the kind of electricity you use will perhaps make the offering more sustainable. I mean, I also want to say that we do have a lot of digital technologies we use to increase just basic efficiencies, the digital twin to ensure that we are being able to do things more sustainably on the ground with fewer people and fewer commuting, less commute, so we can monitor things.
Just explain to us the digital twin concept.
So basically it's the ability to, be able to use technology to monitor, I guess, problem statements on the, in the site area. Yes. And, but I think most importantly, using digital as far as renewables is concerned is really to increase profitability and efficiencies as well and to do things faster. And so we do have a lab where we use use cases to figure out how is it that we can improve our efficiencies through digitalization, and of course, vice versa, we can provide clean electricity to the data centers so that they can do more, but they can do that in a more sustainable manner.
Yes, and Kim, to some degree, Topsoe, although it's a different type of technology, is a technology company also aiming to employ the latest thinking in order to improve the type of energy that we use. Just tell us a little bit about how that's your Power to X works to help that.
Yeah, I'll try without turning it into an hour-long chemistry session.
Yes, we don't have slides. So.
No, that's good, I think. Yeah. So the fundamentals of Power to X is the opportunity to take electrons, and in our case, green electrons, so renewable energy, and convert that into molecules. What that allows you to do is to apply that sustainable energy in spaces where you cannot directly electrify. That could be on an airplane, in a ship, in a steel mill, places that I think industry typically refer to as the hard-to-abate sectors.
Right.
So that is what our solutions basically enable.
Right, so you're getting the cleanest possible industrial fuel, if you like, from that process.
It is basically a 100% clean fuel, and you can make 100% carbon-free fuels.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Let's talk about policy. Palita and I talked earlier about the Trump shock, which is rippling through Davos and particularly through the energy area. And policy making and regulation, as you've already all hinted, is obviously key to making some of these happen. Some of these things happen. I mean, Kim, let me ask you first. I mean, to what degree is having a role model whose very inauguration speech included the words "drill, baby, drill" in the White House a setback for the objectives of the energy transition?
So we believe that no matter what administration is put into place, and that's all irrespective of whether we talk American administration, whether we talk EU, whether we talk India or China, there will be pros and cons. And we are just following along, trying to influence, trying to collaborate. We firmly believe that the best possible pathway forward, irrespective of what we discuss, is collaboration. There will definitely be opportunities to continue to develop green solutions, also in North America, and in US particularly. We believe the infrastructure is right, the political support is there. We also believe that the companies and the visionaries are still there,
right.
100%.
Right. I mean, Vaishali, does the election of Donald Trump and his stated objective to roll back some of these green initiatives, is that going to embolden politicians in India, for example, or indeed elsewhere to take a similar attitude and say, okay, enough is enough? Do you think there's enough momentum to keep the transition going?
I hope not. I really hope not. And, when I look at, Trump was there in 2016 as well. And we continued quite well, and we've made a lot of progress. I think the way countries came together to collaborate at that time was quite significant. The way we collaborated even during COVID to come up with solutions. Every time there is a crisis, I think the world does come together. Now we have to see who takes this leadership, even in a financial crisis. You have the UK leadership, which came up front and took the lead to solve the problem. It is a disturbance, it is an irritation, but I feel that the momentum to move ahead in this direction is significant. I think it's an opportunity for countries to take leadership in something which is the right thing to do.
Right.
And you always need followers to make a leader. So in this case, this is not a role model we must follow. And if we don't follow him, he's not going to be the leader there. So we must really take this as an opportunity to do more. And after all, if we, rewind, look at China. For our sector, kind of cutting off the supply chain from China seemed like a, death wish.
Yes.
Right? Because 90%, over 90%, 98% of the parts for solar modules came from China.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But we have been decoupling for reasons which are worth it because of human rights issues and other supply chain issues which were not acceptable to, for example, our boards, our leadership, and even India wanted a self-reliant sort of a strategy to be able to do more independently. And so I think it is an opportunity to take leadership. I would only say that it's important for us. I think there's a little bit of trust which is required globally, where we can all not look at us competitively and inwardly, but work together to find solutions. I think there's a little bit of dawdling there, which has happened recently. And if in the coming years we take this as an opportunity, well, despite China, it was without China, we've been able to continue and grow. We've doubled our we've been able to increase about 30% of our installed capacity, which means it was business as usual. You came up with enabling policies like the PLI scheme, production-linked incentives for India to be able to meet our demand for our panels, and we are doing all right. So I'm hopeful. I think we will be able to, in fact, there is an issue, will the United States be able to pursue this strategy in a way which is beneficial for them? And we must be able to build a system where folks who are committed to achieving the net zero goals, kind of work together to overrule that.
Just to focus let's follow up brief question on India's challenges particularly. I mean, there is this sort of dual track that India has to follow, because in order to have energy for a vast population, you do need to continue building coal while burning coal and other fossil fuels while the renewables sector accelerates.
Absolutely.
I just wonder whether that balance will change, because people will say, well, if the US isn't doing it, why do we need to do it?
My view is that India has a very clear roadmap for how they want to do things. They have to provide electricity to the people of India. They're committed to that. They're very committed to renewables, as I think it's the fastest growing renewable energy deployer in the world, excluding China. And that itself is a testament to the commitment that there is to put in, clean assets on the ground. We will shift, just like from hard to abate to renewables. There is a journey So even as far as India is, like if I look at our NDCs, we'd committed to non-fossil fossil fuel consumption, to decrease our fossil fuel consumption to about less than 50%, right, by 2030. We're already at 46% as we speak now. Yes. So I think our trend line and our trajectory is all right. I don't think we should worry a lot about the policies in India. I know it's a concern, but we just can't snap out coal. Sure. It has to be a transition. And living there and being a industry practitioner there, I can say that there is commitment, but they're doing it in a way which works for the people of the country and for the larger net zero goals we have set for ourselves.
Okay, that's reassuring that there's enough momentum. I mean, Ásgeir, obviously, again, in an offsetting way, this is a US administration that is very enthusiastic about growth through technology and innovation. The tech chiefs, as we keep saying, were ranged behind Trump at the inauguration. Does that give you hope as a technology enthusiast that actually more innovation will start to emerge in this area, despite Trump's obvious antipathy towards the green projects that Joe Biden and others were promoting?
So I will always welcome innovation. If we try and if see that it works, we will progress as a society. What I would like to emphasize, coming back also to the global role or the role model, and this is something characteristic in blockchain where it empowers individuals. So I think we should see it as a global role, but you also have a strong local focus. I was talking this week to someone who's actually planning to deploy 10 million solar panels. And he was like, okay, one part of the energy is the transport. That's a problem, transporting of energy. And they were like, how can blockchain help us to create a smart, decentralized grid? Or how can we ensure that we enable peer-to-peer trading? How can we create a local digital economy? So I think the focus is, yes, we need sort of the global collaboration, but we also need these local initiatives where innovation can thrive. And I think that's regardless of who's at the top. There will be local businesses, entrepreneurs, governments that will be able to drive that forward. So I see innovation very much coming bottom up rather than top down.
Right. But I guess it seems inevitable that if the large industrial policy, pro-green growth industrial policy that Joe Biden pursued is reversed or even just frozen, that investors will look elsewhere to put their money for those sorts of green initiatives, whether they're blockchain related or otherwise.
Yes, absolutely. So for me, I'm not a politician, nor a policymaker. So for me, it's too early to tell how it will go. I would like to see how things go out. We saw 200 executive orders coming in. We're at day 3 after the inauguration. Let's see how the states react. Let's see how the European Union reacts. Let's see how the rest of the world reacts. So.
Yes.
And I think that it's still important to say that there's really good business also for the US in the energy transition. There are a number of super interesting projects still continuing in US on producing green ammonia, for example, or producing blue ammonia or jet fuel. Right. And I think we have to be careful here not to turn it into, also on the Indian perspective, if we compare, let's not turn it into a competition between renewable energy and coal and oil. There will be a need for oil and coal for the next many decades. Yes. I don't think we should turn it into
this or that.
Yeah, or good or bad. Why should we slam the oil and gas companies or the coal companies? They have kind of been the reason why we as a society are where we are, for good and for bad. And I think this is a possibility to shape a parallel reality where we can slowly start to phase out fossils in areas where it makes sense. Let's not jump headlong into a transition that will, in all honesty, require many decades of hard work and tremendous investments. We're talking, maybe the last number I saw was $150 trillion. That's not going to happen in the next 4 years.
Yes.
And let's be careful about turning it into a battle between renewable and fossil. That won't help us.
Charlie?
Yeah, no, I was just saying I agree. I think there is also various gases which are worse than coal and so on and so forth. So the point is not why not coal and why not this gas or all of that. It's just about doing more to decrease your carbon emissions. And is there a broader strategy to do that? And I think countries should be committed. The question is, the United States doesn't seem like they care about this decarbonization approach. But but we have to see to what extent can this actually happen, whether it is a post-election sort of reinforcement of, okay, I said this and I'm doing this, versus, what are the financial institutions going to do? Once they have a strategy for their own ESG strategies, it comes after, approval from boards and so on and so forth. They can't sort of knee-jerk and just do something different in the United States or for the United States and something else for the rest of the world. So there are many stakeholders which have to align in this U-turn, which looks like the President of the United States wants to take.
Yes.
We'll have to see how successful that U-turn is going to be. There's going to be a disturbance, but, I'm not sure what the magnitude of that will be. And the only point I'm making is that if the rest of the world steps it up, we can perhaps, the irritation of what they can do can potentially be less.
Yes, talking of the rest of the world stepping it up, Kim, the European Union, obviously, as Polita and I discussed earlier, does have a big role here in continuing to incentivize. This time last year at Davos, the European sustainable energy companies were looking enviously across at the kind of incentives that existed under the IRA in the United States and wondering why Europe didn't have something comparable. This is a policy area where the European Union and indeed other countries, China was mentioned by Polita earlier, can now take a lead, is it not?
And again, let's be careful with who leads and who takes inspiration. I think what we saw when the initial Inflation Reduction Act came out, that the European politicians were actually super fast on adapting some of the very good things that sat in the IRA and implemented that in some of the European policies. And I think there is an ongoing dialogue also with Indian policymakers, with Chinese policymakers in Northern Africa. If you look at it from a European perspective, decarbonizing Europe is not something that Europe can handle alone.
Right.
We will need collaboration with US, with Northern Africa region, with the Middle East, with India, with China. And I think that's one of the most helpful things that politicians can do, is to continue to collaborate, continue to share what incentives can we create that fosters collaboration.
The larger plan?
The larger plan and the larger collaboration.
Yes.
Absolutely.
We haven't talked, although you mentioned it, Vaishali, about investors. Clearly, a critical point here is, a lot of your investors and investors in other companies that are on that renewables track were, to some extent, selling the policy of ESG, which is now more or less a banned abbreviation, certainly in Davos and in the US. Again, the momentum that investment flow had, is that turned to a point that it is now impeding some of the things that you and others in your area might want to do?
Not really. I think if I look at environment, social governance, it's really also about, not only about the environment, it's also about how you're doing business. I think there's no doubt that the broader management team, if I look at companies, if I look at shareholders, I think they're all very committed to doing business in the right way. I think the debate has often been about, if you're in a dirty business, are you using ESG to kind of do a bit of greenwashing? I think that is obviously not desirable. But as far as we are concerned, we do believe that, building businesses in sustainable ways to meet, even for countries, I think it's all a very sort of connected ecosystem where, what the countries have committed to do and how the private sector is going to play a part in sort of, contributing to that, and the kind of impact we need to have on the ground is well fueled by environment, social governance. I think it's the right way to do business. It's important for us to be able to look at our people, look at the planet, and look at profitability together. And I feel that investors demand it, regulators demand it, and so do, I think, management teams now. So not really. I think this is the idiosyncrasies of certain investors which has kind of driven this, and then when they want to leave this, driven by their investments and so on and so forth. But I think broadly speaking, the private sector is quite committed to doing business in the right way. And for me, it doesn't matter whether it's ESG or any other acronym, it's really about doing good business in a good way. Right. And I think a lot of good companies are committed to that.
Right. Just want to focus us back on a bit more of the optimism here. Ásgeir, just give us some hope here for both the technological future and the ability to kind of accelerate, even in what is a kind of slightly more volatile geopolitical environment, to accelerate the energy transition.
I think it's about showcasing success and celebrate small success, because as we say, the other one is not going to replace the other. So I think we're at and that's why I'm so hopeful. We have this beautiful technology that is currently being used for not perhaps different reasons than what it could be. So blockchain is associated with cryptocurrency, whereas blockchain can be a beautiful underlying technology which could help with reforestation, with carbon offsetting, providing trust and transparency, because I think this is where it comes back to. There's a trust factor that seems to be a bit missing at the moment in the world. And I was at an event earlier this week where that was the key theme, it's trust. So, and I believe that technology can recreate that trust, but it needs to be initiated by business, by governments themselves. And the technology is there. It's all about awareness and maybe accelerating that mindset by showcasing small successes and then building that out. So if you have a carbon offsetting project that works on a small scale, eventually that could go into the 1 trillion tree forestation plan you have. Yes. And then you have these beautiful examples of how we can work together as a planet. Yeah.
Or as an SAF sort of credit as well for sustainable aviation fuel. I was in a session earlier where they talked about how you can sign up as a traveler for credits, and then that can go towards SAF, and then through a blockchain, it can actually you can track as to whether that money was used to buy sustainable aviation fuel for whoever the off-taker was. So it's quite nifty. I think the reason why there is lack of trust is because I think there's a lack of understanding. Right. It's very confusing, and so maybe more education where we can all understand what is this offering. Yes. I think there's a lot more which needs to be done, and then there will be trust for people to kind of put in money and capital there a lot more. But I totally agree with you that we can use this technology in such an impactful manner across sectors.
Kim, do you have an optimistic note for us as well, just not necessarily on technology, but I know you have a large chunk of your revenue coming from the US, so in that sense you're committed to, what are the opportunities here that a new administration with a growth objective offers?
And I think maybe we can even pull that back to the city we're sitting in right now, Davos, and the whole WF forum. I think the enthusiasm about still making the energy transition happen, and I think the commitment to, as we discussed earlier, that there are no financial returns on a dead planet. I think that comes across in all the discussions that we have, and a commitment from companies, from governments to accelerate these opportunities, as you also pointed out, these flagships, these lighthouses that can pave the way. But at the same time, we also see that we have the pipe dreams and the unsubstantiated claims that has been removed. So we are actually super optimistic also when we look at what we have learned here in Davos.
Yes, Vaishali, taking optimism from your discussion so far in Davos, we're about halfway through. Mm-hmm. Finding that you're getting new ideas, finding new optimism in some of the collaborative discussions you're having?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Optimism around things like blockchain, how we can work together to do more and impact. I think it's great to be in Davos at a time when the world is being rocked a little bit by commitment and trust globally, to talk to people and be able to understand that it's not the end of the world, and it's and there is hope that if a large section of people stay committed, we can continue and be a little bit more, I would say, assertive with our strategies. Perhaps that is the push which might be required, but good ideas to go back and set the tone for the year, not only in our companies, but just to understand the geopolitiks of the world at large.
Yes.
I think Davos is a great start to the year.
Okay, well, thank
Always.
you to our panelists for that discussion and the optimistic up note at the end there. But stay with us because we have another interview coming with the head of the UN Environment Programme, Inga Anderson. Stay tuned for more of the Davos Daily Show.
We are Topso, a leading global provider of technology and solutions for the energy transition. We enable the production of e-fuels, renewable fuels, and low-carbon fuels. These are the fuels for net zero. For decades, we've tackled some of the world's greatest challenges, from supporting fertilizer production to feed growing populations, reducing air pollution, and efficient production of fuels. Now we're working to lead the energy transition.
Inga, welcome to the Davos Daily Show. Now, we're sitting here about to talk about tackling the climate crisis, but we can't avoid the fact that 4,000 miles away, roughly in that direction, just 2 days ago, we saw an arena full of people clapping and cheering as the president of the world's largest economy withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. We also heard the same president claiming that there's an energy emergency that requires the drilling of more fossil fuels, not less. And now, this very morning, we've heard that $300 billion worth of green infrastructure spending is not going to go ahead. Are we having to face up to the fact that we're dealing with a very disunited nations when it comes to the climate crisis?
Well, 193 nations got together to craft the Paris Agreement because they could see what the science was saying, because they were aware of the ever-intense flooding, droughts, wildfires, etc., crop failures, what have you, because they could see that it was unassailable in terms of what the science tells us. But each sovereign nation has a right to do what it chooses to do. And we have a country that has taken this decision. But the rest of the world is on the move. And energy independence comes in many shapes and forms. I happen to live in Kenya, and Kenya is 92% relying on renewables. And that gives them tremendous independence of fluctuating import prices for hydrocarbon. So I think we have to look at energy independence and or emergency, whichever you want to call it, in the way that works best. We've seen since 2010 renewable energy prices on solar, for example, drop by 80%. It's now competitive, renewable, with fossil fuels. So some countries are very much leaning in that direction because in the longer run, obviously, this will become something upon which they can rely. The sun will shine. The wind will blow, the waves will move, and that becomes a very solid investment. Also, of course, we've seen the amount of jobs that are being created by those kinds of investments, often in places that have otherwise been depressed. Maybe they are ex-mining towns, and so across the world, I'm talking. And so, again, each nation will do as it desires. But we have 192 countries that stand determined. And of course, we just need to look at, yes, we have had wildfires before, yes, we've had flooding before, but the intensity and the frequency with which we are seeing these occurrences is on an upward trajectory. And again, no one wants to see their house burned down, and my heart breaks for the people of California who has lived with this. No one wants to see their crops fail. No one wants to see their lands parched or inundated. And so moving on the adaptation side, adapting to that which is coming, as well as moving on the mitigation side, remains very much the focus of the United Nations.
And yet in a country that has just seen these devastating wildfires, there is this support for continuing to drill for fossil fuels. Is there a risk that What the US is signalling gives license to some of the other 192 countries you mentioned to also withdraw from Paris and to also reverse climate measures.
Well, we've been here before, may I say, and we did not see that. I think that on the whole, there is a clear understanding that absence of mitigation will lead to more impact and fragility of communities. And so I would certainly not project that we would see other departures. To the contrary, I think we'll see a doubling down to ensure that the populations of countries that are exposed to climate impacts can be protected in terms of adaptation investments, and that we can get greater energy independence through smart investment in renewables.
Let's turn then to action that can be taken by many of those countries that you refer to. And a huge part of cutting fossil fuel emissions and tackling environmental pollution is reducing the production and use of plastic. Now, I recently edited an FT report that highlighted the fact that there's 7 billion tonnes of plastic waste that humans have generated in their time, and more than 2/3 has been dumped into the environment. Either buried, burnt, or even circulating in our own bloodstreams. Tackling these harmful effects, I know, has been a focus of yours, and it's what you're here in Davos to talk about it. How much progress has been made? Because it's been tough, hasn't it?
It's been difficult, but then we're talking about a big sector that is critical to many economies, a material that is ubiquitous. It's in all of our lives and indeed in our bodies. But also that is part of the electric mobility fleet and lighter planes and trains and what have you. So it's also a solution material in some senses for e-mobility. But we obviously need to talk about that which ends up in the environment. And that is single-use and short-lived. And there we have to see a reduction. We have to think, and different countries have different uses, right? As I mentioned, I live in Kenya. We do not have straws and plastic forks and what have you. There are other uses there, and the country has actually made illegal plastic bags some 10 years ago. And alternatives, lots of alternatives are there. The point is that the single-use and short-lived that we are seeing in our open environment, in part because of poor waste management, in part because of the ease with which we use and discard these materials, is a major problem. Like you said, I think it's just over 70% that ends up in open landfills or otherwise discarded. Some 10% are recycled, and that's a generous number, and the rest is incinerated. And again, in the global south, incineration is in the open dumps, and so you live with those fumes. So it is an issue. Waste management and recycling is an important part of it, but reduction of the production of raw polymer for that which is single-use and short-lived has to be part of the conversation. And it's not so much the reduction side, but it is can we agree that there are certain applications that are frankly unnecessary? And in different jurisdictions, different countries will have different interpretation of that, because uses of the single-use and short-lived are different. It's also very interesting to see that the brands are generally calling for quote-unquote global rules, because it's really complicated. I have my brand, but in this country I can have it thus, but in that country I need to have it this way. So the fact that the brands are leaning in and say, okay, yes, we actually think that a global treaty could be quite helpful if it provides incentivization for extended producer responsibility, i.e. take-back schemes. And those take-back schemes, again, will be different from Manila to, I don't know, Copenhagen, right? Because the uses are different. But the point is that if each country has a treaty, a sort of baseline that says, we're stepping into this, we're doing take-back schemes, we are encouraging, not penalizing the producer of the brand whose thing that we are, but rather we are ensuring reduction of certain things that are not necessary in our economy, and we are taking back that which is in use. Plus, of course, we're seeing amazing innovation. Because some products, we have to ask ourselves, do they have to be wet? When I was young, many of the soaps and things were hard. It's not that we need to go back to the future, so to speak, but there is a lot of R&D precisely in the product itself. Washing powder that comes like a little sheet, I don't know if you've seen it, in a cardboard box. All kinds of innovations. Soda drinks that come dry and you put them in your bubble machine or whatever it's called, and the next thing you have your soda, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of innovation happening in the brand side, be it cosmetics, be it personal hygiene, or be it food. That's the direction of travel. Now, on the treaty, probably you want to ask about that.
Well, I do, because you're right to say that brands are innovating. Consumers are even demanding it.
Yes.
We have to face the fact that the brands might want to do it, but it's countries, it's governments that need to be signatories to a treaty. And there are, let's face it, some very, very large countries, economies, that are very reliant on fossil fuel industries, plastic production. That must make it almost impossible to get agreement on a production limit in a treaty, mustn't it?
Yeah, and this is still in discussion, and I don't know that that's where it will land. It's very much an issue for conversation. There are these three areas in the treaty text that are still, well, there's the whole text is still being discussed, but three areas, and one deals with sustainable supply, sustainable production and consumption. But let's talk about then what circularity looks like. Because we will need the resin producers to enable that circularity, to have recycled content that will no longer be virgin polymer but recycled polymer for that which is needed, whether it's in the mobility sector, the transport sector, whether it's in the appliance sector or the construction sector, where we know that this material is going to be used, electricity sector, obviously. And so those areas, can some of this be circular? I think it could. How would that look like? And so there are real opportunities for the resin producers. And as I said, this material is, what this treaty is about is eliminating plastic pollution in the environment, including in the marine environment. That's the focus. But we have to be mindful and cognizant that this sector, and it's not just the oil-producing countries, that this sector produces jobs.
Yep.
And this is where we have to understand the Sustainable Development Goal, leaving no one behind. It's easier said than done. But in many low-income countries, collecting and recycling and producing items that are cheaper because they are made of plastic is a job. And so those jobs, including that of the waste pickers, we have to be very mindful, whether it's the high-end jobs or the lower-end jobs, waste pickers, that we need to talk about what that transformation looks like.
Well, given all of the jobs that are dependent on this particular industry, given that there are certain countries that might want to focus on circularity rather than a production limit, how far away are we from a treaty? Because there have been 5 rounds, if I remember correctly, of discussion, negotiation, sitting around the table, and we don't yet have it. When's the next round? How much work is there still to do?
When I was part of pushing for the 2-year, let's get it done, in part because I've seen negotiations drag out. It took us 21 years to agree to less than 2 degrees. I didn't feel that we had 21 years, and I don't think the world felt. So I was very happy that we saw with the aim of landing it by the end of 2024. It was highly ambitious. We've never negotiated a whole treaty. Look at Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, the High Seas Treaty. It took 12 years, right? But I don't want to go there.
Right.
So the point is, it was ambitious, but it was good because it focused the mind. We had 5 sessions in 2 years. It's like 5 COPs. It's massive. But we now have a text, a 22-page text, not a voluminous one. This is the chair's text. It is the basis on which we start negotiations in what I very much would want to be the final round, which we hope to have in this summer. But we're still working on the finer detail with member states. And the three areas, and you've mentioned one, which is sustainable consumption and production. The other that we need to tackle is chemicals of concern. And the last one, financing. I do believe that there are bridges that can be built, well understanding some of the areas that we have discussed that are difficult. And so that's what we're working on now with key leading countries from all the various negotiations communities, I should say, to ensure that there can be a treaty that will help us, the global us, eliminate plastic pollution, including in the marine environment.
Just one last very quick question. You talk about how long it takes to get agreement, how many years. You also focus very much on emissions. I think you published your emissions gap report at the end of last year. I mean, it focused on the fact that hitting the 1.5 degrees limit on warming above pre-industrial levels is getting increasingly difficult. The window of achieving this is almost closing. Just in a few words, is there still a chance of hitting that limit?
Yes, but it'll take a Herculean effort. We increased our emissions by 1.3% in 2023. Increased. If we want to hit 1.5, and I suggest that we do, we need to decrease between now and 2030 by 42%. It gives you a sense.
It does.
If we want to hit 2 degrees, we need to decrease by 28%. Both are massive steps. Now, the truth is that we can. When we look at the sectors, when we look at the ramp up in energy investments, when we look at what forestry can give us, when we look at super pollutants like methane, there are a number of ways, if we get our mind to it, that can actually help us, and it is doable, but it will take a concerted effort by all, and that's why the Paris Agreement is there.
Yes.
And bypassing it will have consequences, because you can't negotiate with physics. No. You can't negotiate with nature, and nature will send us the invoices for our laggardness in terms of those forest fires, those inundations, those droughts, the people movement, and so on and so forth.
We've seen the warnings, which I suppose which just reiterates how important keeping those 192 countries on board for the Paris Agreement will be. Precisely. Inga, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of Davos. Now, coming up tomorrow on the Davos Daily Show, our theme is navigating geopolitical shocks and building business resilience. So thank you for watching today. This has been the Davos Daily Show. Do please join us again tomorrow.